Today we're looking into a really unsettling set of files, ones that show this collision between the darkest parts of the human mind and, well, the complexities of digital law in our age. We are diving deep into the case of Gilberto Valle. You might know him better by the name the tabloids gave him, the cannibal cop. Our mission today is really to get past those screaming headlines. We want to unpack the sources we have, understand this really bizarre double life that a respected NYPD officer was leading, and also grasp the truly graphic nature of his secret world, and maybe most importantly, the landmark legal battle that came out of it all. It boils down to this huge question: where's the actual line between violent thoughts, even repulsive fantasy, and criminal intent?
Yeah, this case, it really is a defining one for modern law, I think. It basically forced the courts to grapple with this idea of thought crime in a way they maybe hadn't, certainly not with the internet involved like this. The core tension here is, well, it's profound. Can you legally say someone conspired to commit a terrible crime based purely on, let's call them dark fantasies? Fantasies that were incredibly detailed, yes, shocking, absolutely, but maybe never actually left the keyboard. This whole deep dive really centers on that threshold. Did Gilberto Valle cross from just typing disturbing things to actually, taking steps towards a truly heinous crime?
Okay, so let's start there. With the man himself, the contrast is just incredibly stark. On one side, you've got the Gilberto Valle the world saw. He's 28 years old, seems like a model citizen, a dedicated public servant. He's an NYPD officer, well-respected, working the night beat, often in challenging areas like Harlem and the Upper West Side.
Absolutely. And the image he projected was all about ambition and responsibility. He seemed genuinely proud of his career. He'd been an honor student, and this is important. He'd just passed his sergeant's exam, so he was looking at a promotion, more pay, more stability. That was the path he seemed to be on?
Right. He even talked about building a normal, typical American life. He's married to Kathleen Mangan, described as his sweetheart. They had a baby girl, just 11 months old. He portrayed himself as, a devoted husband, a good dad, focused on providing. So the external picture wasn't just okay. It was, exemplary, wasn't it?
It really was. And yet, for about 2 years, running completely parallel to this respectable life, Valle was deep into this profoundly dark secret world. When he wasn't in uniform, when he wasn't being a dad, he was spending hours on what he called the savage site, Dark Fetish Netcom. Our sources point to this being a really private, members-only Russian forum, specifically for people into, let's just say, extremely graphic and specific fetishes.
And on this site, he wasn't Gilberto Valle, the cop. He had this online alter ego, completely separate. The screen name was Girl Meat Hunter. Sometimes shortened, right?
Yeah, MHL52 in some of the chat logs. It was a total transformation.
Yeah.
And as for where this darkness came from, Valle himself admitted these fantasies weren't new. They apparently started way back, around puberty. He mentioned seeing something on TV, just a woman tied up, and it triggered something. But instead of fading, these thoughts just grew. He said he tried to push them down as he got older, but they kept coming back, spiraling into stuff that was more extreme, more violent, really repulsive.
And the focus became incredibly specific and disturbing. We're not just talking vague, dark thoughts. These were detailed, collaborative fantasies. Role-playing, centered on kidnapping, torture, rape. And the thing that really caught the headlines, cannibalism, specifically planning how to cook and eat women. He kept saying, didn't he, that it was all fictional?
He did. He insisted it was just role-play, a way to, quote, wind down after stressful shifts, like a pressure valve for his psyche. But the language he used, it often sounded like more than just pretend. It suggested this deep, almost physical craving. We know from the evidence, the chat logs, he wrote things like, "I have longed to butcher and cook female meat." And even more directly, "I'm dying to taste some girl meat."
I mean, that's not just making up a story. It's like scripting these incredibly sadistic acts, planning them out, sharing them.
And he wasn't alone in this. He was chatting, planning with several other men. And these weren't obvious deviants on the surface either. They seemed to have normal lives too. You mentioned a librarian, Christopher Ashe, a nurse from England, Dale Bollinger, who called himself Meat Market Man. Yeah, and a mechanic, Michael Van Hezes from New Jersey. Plus, Ali Khan, who was reportedly a butcher in Pakistan. The irony of their day jobs. A librarian, a nurse, a cop, a butcher. It's just staggering. But it really highlights how compartmentalized this whole thing was. And these guys weren't just saying shocking things. They were discussing logistics, how to kidnap women, detailed methods, like putting them in a suitcase. They talked about delivering them for gang rape, killing them, and then how to prepare the bodies.
The level of detail is just stomach churning. They're sharing enthusiasm for the absolute worst things imaginable.
Exactly. Take the chats with Ali Khan, the butcher. Khan apparently used his real-world skills in the fantasy, writing things like, young women are good, nothing too big and fat, American meat has its own taste, I'll make a good meal for you. I mean, they discuss logistics, almost like a supply chain, all through keystrokes. And this is the kind of stuff the prosecution later pointed to, arguing, look, the agreement, the conspiracy, it's already formed right here in these chats.
So Valle really thought he had this firewall, right, between his life as a cop and dad and this secret online world. He was terrified of being found out, called a freak. But the cracks started to show, as they often do, right at home.
Yeah, the suspicion started pretty normally, actually. His wife, Kathleen, she noticed him staying up super late, always on the computer. Her first thought, the classic modern fear, was that he was having an affair. Valle always denied that, said he was never physically unfaithful, but he was clearly preoccupied. So looking for evidence of cheating, she did something decisive. Installed spyware on their home computer.
Wow. And when she checked those logs, it couldn't have been what she expected. Instead of messages to another woman, she found just horror. The chat rooms, yes, but also his search history. Things like how to abduct a girl, how to chloroform a girl, practical, terrifying searches.
And that's the moment everything shifted. It went from discovering a, let's say, deeply disturbing hobby to realizing this was potentially life or death, because she found out she wasn't just reading about his fantasies. She was in them. She was one of the main targets he was discussing by name.
He even wrote about it later with unbelievable frankness in his memoir, Raw Deal. He admitted these fantasies about his own wife started almost immediately, right after their first date.
That's right. He wrote that after that first date, he went home and fantasized about her being chloroformed and kidnapped, stripped naked, and laid out on a platter with an apple in her mouth. I mean, this wasn't just a passing dark thought. It was something deeply ingrained, personalized, that he carried through their whole relationship, marriage, even after having a child together.
And these weren't just private thoughts anymore. He shared them. He planned them out with Ali Khan, the butcher in Pakistan. They talked about tying her up, slitting her throat, watching the blood drain. His writing about her online was just so cold. While planning her murder, he wrote, "She's a sweet girl. I like her a lot, but I will move on," like she was an obstacle.
The betrayal must have been absolute, and the fear unimaginable. Kathleen grabbed the baby and just fled. There's this brief moment, apparently, where she texted him about couples therapy, saying, "I'm not giving up." But soon after, once the full horror sank in the names, the violence, the planning, she went to the FBI.
And that kicked off the formal investigation. About a month after she left, Valle's two worlds didn't just collide, they exploded. 6 FBI agents, guns drawn, showed up at his door. He was arrested. This was back in 2012.
Now, the chats were obviously the reason the FBI got involved. But the government knew, legally, prosecuting someone just for horrific typing is tricky. For the main charge, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, they needed more. They needed proof of what the law calls an overt act, some real-world, tangible step taken to actually move the plan forward.
And that's where his job came back to bite him, wasn't it? His position as an NYPD officer.
Exactly. The key overt act the prosecution latched onto was his misuse of police resources. He was charged with illegally accessing a restricted federal law enforcement database, an NYPD tool. He used it to look up personal details, addresses, even photos of the actual women he was fantasizing about, real women, friends, acquaintances. So the argument was, he used his badge, his official access, to stalk potential victims in the real world. That was the bridge they needed, linking the dark online fantasy to a concrete, illegal action.
So the story breaks. The Cannibal Cop nickname is everywhere, and it guarantees this trial is going to be a media circus.
Oh, absolutely. And the trial itself, over 12 days, was recordedly brutal. They read the chats out loud, line by line, every gruesome detail dissected in open court.
Imagine being one of his friends or former classmates called to testify, having to sit there and listen to how this guy they knew, this cop, allegedly planned to kidnap, torture, and eat them. Because he wasn't just talking about generic victims, right? He used real names, uploaded hundreds of pictures of real women he knew from Facebook, from his life.
The prosecution really hammered on the specificity. They wanted the jury to see this wasn't vague fantasy, it was targeted planning. For example, there was a 27-year-old prosecuting attorney he knew. He apparently bragged in the chats about tying her to a pulley in his basement, cooking her alive, trussing her up like a turkey. The language was deliberately cold, mechanical.
And there was that incident where he seemed to be negotiating over a price for a real person.
Right. He allegedly discussed an acquaintance with Michael Van Hise, the mechanic. Valle apparently wrote something like 5,000 and she's all yours. And Van Has replied, could we do 4? The prosecution presented that as haggling over a human life. He also targeted an 18-year-old student, calling her the most desirable piece of meat I've ever met. The sheer volume, the specificity, it was all designed to paint him as dangerous as someone about to act.
But the prosecution's case really seemed to crystallize around one specific person, didn't it? A former classmate named Kimberly.
Yes, Kimberly became central. The chats involving her were flagged by FBI analysts as being different, more concrete. They called it the reality blueprint.
A blueprint. What made it stand out?
Documentation. The absolute key piece of evidence was a document found on his computer, literally titled, Abducting and Cooking Kimberly. And this wasn't just random chat text. It read like a checklist for a crime. It listed materials, a specific car type, chloroform, rope, a gag, even cheap sneakers to be disposed of easily, and a bag specifically to collect DNA evidence. The prosecution argued, look, planning this meticulously, writing it down like instructions, that is intent.
Yeah, and they connected that blueprint back to the need for an overt act. What was the supposed real-world action related to Kimberly?
They claimed the final piece was that Valle actually met Kimberly for lunch on a specific date that had been mentioned in the planning chats. Now, he brought his wife and child with him to this lunch. The prosecution argued this was surveillance. He was checking her out, casing the target, while using his family as the perfect cover.
Okay, so that's the prosecution's story. Emotionally, it sounds pretty damning.
Yeah.
But the defense had a counter-argument, right? Focused squarely on the law.
Absolutely. His defense attorney, Robert Baum, pushed back hard. Their core argument was simple. Valle never intended to act. It was all talk, however graphic and disturbing, just fetish role-playing taken to an extreme.
So the defense basically said, you can't jail someone for thoughts, no matter how awful they are. That's fundamental to the U.S. legal system, isn't it? Thoughts alone aren't crimes.
Exactly. They hammered that point home. Where are the actions? He never bought the chloroform. He never bought the rope. He didn't get the specific car. None of the materials listed in that blueprint were ever acquired. And that meeting with Kimberly. The defense argued, come on, meeting someone in a public restaurant in broad daylight with your wife and baby, that's not how a kidnapper operates. It was just lunch.
They also stressed the context, right? That these conversations only happened on that specific fetish site.
Right. They argued the language, the slang, it was all part of this insulated fantasy world. It wasn't a real criminal conspiracy reaching out into the real world. It stayed within the bounds of that website.
Still, despite those legal arguments, the jury, they heard those horrific details day after day.
And the verdict came back guilty. Guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping and guilty of the illegal database access charge. It sent shockwaves through the legal community. Many analysts were stunned. Valle was facing potential life in prison. People started calling it a thought-based prosecution, drawing parallels to, Orwell's 1984. It felt like a really dangerous precedent.
So a guilty verdict, facing life. But that wasn't the end of the story.
Not at all. Valle ended up spending 21 months behind bars. But all through that time, he and his defense team insisted he was innocent of the conspiracy charge. They believed the law was on their side, that thoughts weren't actions. They appealed immediately.
And then came a really dramatic turn, didn't it, in July 2014?
A huge reversal. The U.S. District Judge, Paul Gardeffi, the very same judge who had presided over the trial, he overturned the kidnapping conspiracy conviction. It was a pretty extraordinary move, a judge essentially saying the jury got it wrong on the most serious charge.
What was his reasoning? How did he justify overturning the jury's decision?
Judge Gardeffi wrote a very detailed opinion. He acknowledged how awful the chats were, deeply disturbing, he called them. He mentioned the talk of human-sized ovens and rotisseries. He didn't downplay the horror. But, crucially, he ruled that the alleged conspiracy existed solely in cyberspace. That was the key phrase.
Existed solely in cyberspace. That really sums it up.
It does. He concluded that even though Valle had these, quote, deviant and depraved sexual interests, the prosecution failed to prove that any real-world, non-internet-based steps were ever taken to kidnap anyone. He went through the evidence piece by piece. He decided there wasn't proof of a genuine agreement to commit the crime, and critically, no real overt act in furtherance of that alleged agreement.
So that meeting with Kimberly, the lunch, the judge didn't buy the surveillance argument.
No. He sided with the defense on that. Meeting someone publicly with family after an invitation legally that just didn't qualify as an overt act towards kidnapping. And the blueprint document. While disturbing, the judge classified it as mere preparation, which isn't the same as an attempt or a conspiracy under the law. Essentially, the court drew a line. Fantasizing, even in graphic detail, isn't a crime. Discussing a fantasy, even planning it out hypothetically online, isn't a conspiracy unless you take concrete steps to actually make it happen in the real world.
But it's important we remember the other charge, the illegal database access, that conviction stood.
Right. Yes, absolutely. That conviction was upheld. And that distinction is critical. Accessing the police database was a concrete, illegal, real-world action. He misused his authority. That was a crime. The chaps, though. As vile as they were, the court ultimately decided they remained protected thought and speech because the crucial link to real-world action beyond the database misuse just wasn't proven for the kidnapping conspiracy. And the appellate court later agreed with Judge Gardeffi, specifically saying they didn't want to give the government the power to punish us for our thoughts and not our actions.
So Valle was released after nearly 2 years in prison.
Yeah.
But the damage, it was immense, wasn't it?
Completely life-altering. Fired from the NYPD, lost his career, lost custody of his daughter, his wife divorced him. He did issue a public apology, calling his online behavior infantile, acknowledging the harm he'd caused.
Now, there was still this public fear, right? Did they let a monster go free? The defense tried to address that, didn't they? With a psychological evaluation.
They did. They brought in a very well-known forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Park Dietz. This is someone who's interviewed people like Jeffrey Dahmer. They wanted an expert opinion on whether Valle was truly dangerous or just deeply disturbed.
And what was Dr. Dietz's take after evaluating Valle? Did he see him as Jeffrey Dahmer in the making?
No, quite the opposite, actually. Dr. Dietz concluded that Valle's fantasies were, in his words, more cartoonish than criminal. He stated there was absolutely no evidence that he ever carried out any criminal activity. He made a key distinction. Valle was not a cannibal. Unlike Dahmer, who actually acted on his urges, Valle only talked about it, role-played it. Dietz essentially saw it as a performance, albeit a deeply disturbing one.
And the psychological profile, what kind of person did Dietz describe?
He painted Valle as fundamentally a shy guy, a loser in love, someone who was actually, maybe surprisingly, a little slow to get around to having a sex life at all. Valle even admitted in his book he was still a virgin at 25.
That's quite a contract.
Yeah.
A man struggling with basic intimacy in real life, but orchestrating these incredibly violent, detailed scenarios online.
Exactly. And Dr. Dietz even pinpointed a potential origin for the specific fantasy. He traced it back to a scene in the movie The Mask, the Jim Carrey movie, where Cameron Diaz is tied up but presented as both sexy and a damsel in distress. The argument Dietz made was that this pointing more towards a psychological escape, a maladaptive coping mechanism rather than genuine criminal planning. The takeaway for the court was, having dark, secret fantasies doesn't automatically make you a criminal poised to act.
So where is Gilberto Valle today? What's his life like now?
Well, he's in his early 40s now. He apparently works in construction, trying to have some kind of normal life. Interestingly, he actually wrote a book, a graphic horror novel called A Gathering of Evil, published in 2018. It's about sadists kidnapping people in New York.
Wow, so he channeled it into fiction.
Seems that way. He also says he still goes to therapy every week. He admits the fantasies haven't totally gone away. Still part of me, he said, but claims he doesn't do the online role-playing anymore.
And he's Corali's land in other ways.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable. But he's reportedly on dating apps. Screen name, Amicable114. And his profile lists his limits as no smoking, killing, fat chicks. It's just a bizarre snapshot of someone legally cleared of the main charge but forever marked by his words. He himself has said he'll never be able to shake this nickname, the Cannibal Cop.
So looking back at the legal side, what's the lasting impact of this case?
The precedent set by Judge Gardeffi's reversal is really significant. It strongly reaffirmed the principle that in the U.S. legal system, you punish actions, not thoughts or words, no matter how repellent those thoughts and words might be. Valle's online writings caused immense distress, no doubt about it. But the courts drew a firm line. Fantasy, discussion, even detailed planning online doesn't cross into criminal conspiracy until you take concrete, real-world steps to carry it out.
And that leaves us with this really difficult tension, doesn't it? You have the undeniable fear and revulsion people felt reading those chats, versus this fundamental legal protection for freedom of thought, even the darkest thoughts. It forces you to ask, is there ever a point where digital planning, where words on a screen become so detailed, so specific, that they should be treated as action, even if the physical steps haven't been taken yet? Valle himself pointed out something interesting. He said people message him online saying they wish he'd be shot or killed. And he argues, ironically, that they have the freedom to express those violent thoughts, because his case helped protect that very freedom. So what does it really mean for us as a society when our legal system has to defend the freedom to think the unthinkable, even when those thoughts belong to someone like the cannibal cop? That is definitely something to think about.